Hi, I'm Keegan Flegner. I'm 17 years old and I live in Santa Monica, California. When I was in first grade, I was diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum. Since that time, sports have played a huge role in changing my life. So I want to show the world how all kinds of sports can help all kinds of people with all kinds of mental and emotional challenges. Welcome to Sports on the Spectrum. My guest today is Dan Shaughnessy. Dan is a senior sports columnist for the Boston Globe, covering the Boston Red Sox since 1981, and is the author of several sports books, including The Curse of the Bambino, Francona, the Red Sox Years, and Senior Year, A Father, a Son, and High School Baseball. Dan has been voted one of America's top sports columnists by the Associated Press Sports Editors, and was honored in 2016 by the Baseball Hall of Fame in receiving the J.G. Taylor Spink Award. Please join me in welcoming Dan Shaughnessy to Sports on the Spectrum. So I always like to start off my interviews with my guests by starting at the very beginning. And by that, I mean like the beginning of their sports career and their sports life. And so I'll start off by asking the question I start off pretty much every interview I have here, which is, what are your very first memories of sport? And it doesn't even have to be playing them. It can be watching them, whatever.
Yes, I'm the youngest of 5 children. I grew up in the early 60s, and my brother was a really good athlete. He was 6 years older. My sister was really good. I was going to their games as a kid, and I think probably coming home and reporting their games to my parents, and just I really got into it when I was about 7, 8 years old, reading and writing and playing, and just very immersed in baseball and yeah, especially Major League Baseball in the early 60s when the Red Sox were not very good. But I was a little sponge, and you kind of absorb a lot of information at that age. So it was a big jump start for me. I played sports through high school. I was varsity basketball, baseball. I wasn't very good, but I was on the teams. And it was a jump start to know that I liked to read about it so much. And then eventually I was writing about it when I was in high school and kept doing that in college. And luckily, fortunately, been able to have a career doing it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's like if you're doing all that, through the course of growing up, it's like it's bound to lead you somewhere. So for it to get you to the point you are now, I definitely think is something worth feeling good about. So, and I guess I'll continue on and ask you kind of a related question in a sense, but kind of a little stereotypical, I might say. But I'm sure you get where I'm coming from here, and that is at the same time of growing up and having all these great memories of playing sports and watching sports and reporting sports, what were some of the specific teams and maybe players that you followed growing up, and why was that the case?
Well, it was baseball was very centric to me. The local basketball team, the Celtics, they won the championship every year of my youth. So that was, we had Bill Russell and Bob Cousy and then John Havlicek and Sam Jones and on and on. And to have a team that won the championship every year, that kind of spoiled us for everything else. They were the only team in the region like that. The Patriots were kind of a joke. They were in the old AFL. The Bruins were never very good until Bobby Orr got here at the end of the decade. And the Sox, they struggled. They'd been 10-team league. They finished 8th or 9th, so that was a struggle. I just missed Ted Williams. I never saw him play. Carl Yastrzemski was a rookie my first year being a fan. But yeah, those guys like, Yaz, Russell, and eventually Bobby Orr. I was in high school by that time, but those were the guys to pay most attention to out of the gate.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think for any kid growing up in New England at that time, these were the guys and the teams they loved following, despite their varying levels of success and failure, so it's like, as a result, you gotta keep in mind where you came from, I guess, is what I'm getting at here. And as a result, the fact that there were all these individual guys who also stood out at the same time, I'm sure that made it all the more memorable. So I totally get where you're coming from right there. And I guess I'll kind of go back to your personal life a little bit here and ask you, because you mentioned that, baseball was really your jig from the get-go. And I'll ask, as a young player, when you were playing it, whether it was in Little League, Pony League, or any other league, whatever, what were some of your proudest or just favorite moments when playing in those leagues and in those games as a child?
Yeah, so Little League was a great experience for me. I was, what they would call the majors, the last 3 years, which would be, in my case, I guess, fifth, sixth, and seventh grade, or fourth, fifth, and sixth. But I remember, you get bigger every year, and then your 12-year Little League year, you can hit the ball over the fence. So that's it was a big thrill. I remember hitting a home run my first time up in my last year of Little League. And I led the league in homers that year. I could hit homers. So that was fun. It was fun to be part of that. And our team won the championship and of our little town and all that stuff. So it was good to have that kind of success early. I had an issue though, because my brother was so good. I was never going to be as good as him. And that I figured that out when I was like in high school, and I accepted it pretty early on. Everybody else kind of did too, but those expectations, that was a little bit of a burden as a younger person, because he was playing varsity baseball in the seventh grade. And he ended up playing in the Cape League, and he was really good. And I had none of that. I was very average, but I really liked playing. And so I made varsity baseball as a sophomore in high school. That was a thrill. I was playing every day, and I was really excited to be able to do that. I loved it. And it was weird to be that active with it, and then it just goes away. Like, I never played competitive after high school. And it's funny, you spend so much time doing that until you're 18, and then you never do it again. Basketball, I loved. I was a good shooter. Again, made varsity as a sophomore. I never played. We had guys much better than me. But I didn't care. I mean, I accepted it. It was fun being on the team. We were good. You ride the bus with the cheerleaders. I had all the trappings of the fun things about it, and none of the pressure of having to do it. So, because I was like a garbage time guy on the basketball team the whole time, and but it didn't take that much away from the experience for me, because I accepted my mediocrity, and I was really happy to be part of the team. And I was a good practice player. I didn't complain. I was good, easy for the coach to have around in that sense.
Yeah, no, listen, it's actually really funny you mentioned that, because I actually had my first high school basketball game with my varsity team in forever yesterday. And like you, I spent pretty much the entire game on the bench. It wasn't until the game was effectively over that I got on the floor. But at the same time, I kept saying to both, my dad and everybody else, I was like, hey, was one of the best experiences of my life, because it's just such a joy to get to experience the idea of just being on this team and, seeing the games and getting all the benefits of it and getting to practice.
I think it's good to kind of have that acceptance and awareness early on. I mean, it's not capitulating 100%. You always want to keep getting better, but I was also realistic enough to know what my place was. I didn't have delusions of grandeur regarding my own abilities.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like you're writing in a lot of sense. It's like you're always realistic when it comes to, Boston sports teams' chances. It's like you're never afraid to state the obvious. So I think that makes your viewpoint all the more valuable, honestly. And I guess
appreciate that.
Yeah, no, you're welcome, man. And I guess staying in the high school, but actually kind of shifting to somebody else's high school career in a sense. I want to talk specifically about one of your books. Now, obviously, you've written a lot of them. A lot of them have had lots of success, but one of them that particularly stood out to me was one of the books that I mentioned earlier, which is Senior Year, A Father, a Son, and High School Baseball. And I'd be curious, actually, if you could explain to our viewers who haven't read it or even heard of it per se, what is that book about? Because I think the story is actually quite interesting here.
Well, thanks. It was one of those ones, I have a kind of a house publisher by that time. I had done, I don't know, maybe 10 or more books. And, I was able, usually it was me doing a book at the request of the publisher or whatever party wanted this book. And I was sort of a contract book player that way. I never really was charged up to do them that much, but this was one, it was my own initiative, and they indulged me to do it. It was a low advance, and I didn't really care. I knew being a writer and one who, I kept a high school diary. I was such a cornball. So being a writer, and then my daughters were both good athletes and played, high school and a little college softball, and their younger brother, my only son, he was a very good high school player, very good little league. He was much better than me. He was more like my brother. And it was fun. And then he was getting recruited, and he wasn't like a big stud guy or anything. In fact, physically, he's only like 5'10". So that was just definitely a a distant center for the higher levels to go after him. But he was a very good high school player, and I've been around enough to know kind of what he was and what he wasn't, although you never really know with your own child. But I knew I was going to miss it when he was no longer playing locally. And so I cataloged his senior year of high school. And it was sort of a memoir for me, a way to tell my own high school stories and just sort of there's universal truths in a book like that, because you don't want to make it about, oh, is my kid great? Nobody wants to read that. But if you can bring out the universal truths, like what it's like for parents to watch their children, what it's like for coaches to have a difficult player or to manage all these personalities and just all the nonsense, and you think you know everything when you're that age, and then reflecting on my own self from 35 years earlier into what was then the now of 2005 and 6. It was a fun way to kind of get out all my old guy stories and talk about my childhood, and then through the prism of what was happening with my son. And then we had the additional part that he was good and he was being recruited, and he got to go to Notre Dame on a recruiting visit, and he had success at that level that I never enjoyed. So, in retrospect, I wasn't that sure it was a great thing to do to him. He was kind of a quiet kid, and I don't think he ever would have objected. And he got to vet the whole thing and look at it before it was published. Everybody in the family did, because I didn't want anybody saying, hey, that's a family secret, you can't put that out there. Because it was a lot of stuff was revealed in there. It was sort of personal in nature. But I thought, and the response to that book, I wish I could have had more eyeballs on it, but it did get a lot of like coaches and parents. The responses was wonderful in that book. Everybody who read it liked it. And that's unusual with my material, because usually there's half of them just hate you out of the gate. So, and it was a nice experience. And I still worry about a little bit if it was fair to do to him, to put the eyeballs on him a little bit. And he did not have a great college career. He had one pretty good season and kind of flamed out. But it was more, I think he was playing Division I, the ACC, and it's just, they were, he's hitting against Matt Harvey and Strasburg and these guys, and it was, it's a little tougher then. So he reached the ceiling, but it got him into college, and that was kind of fun. So anyway, it's a hard book to describe, as I just demonstrated, but it was a good read, and I was pleased with the reception that it got.
Yeah, no, I mean, I everything you said right there, it's like obviously I'm not drawing a total comparison. It's like the idea of the book to me relates into what I have to experience myself, specifically as your son right there, where it's like, I'm the person who, like you said, I feel like I know everything, but it's like, I'm still learning so much.
You always do at your age.
Oh yeah, no. And the nice part too is, like we were talking about being realistic. I totally understand that and embrace it at the same time. So it's like, but I totally get where you're coming from there. And I guess I'll quickly ask too, as sort of a follow-up. I know you described a lot and what you took away from it all, but I guess I would ask, like, what were some of your most gratifying or maybe challenging parts of being in that role when you were?
Of the role of writing it or being the parent?
Being the parent.
It was challenging, if he wasn't taking care of business, like he wasn't being a good teammate and part of there. And that really bothered me, and I think part of that was he was always better as the when he was younger with older teammates who, he wouldn't disrespect him or mouth off or think he was the big guy. But by the time he's a senior, then he is the big guy. And it didn't bring out the best in his personality, I didn't think. Toward the end, it gets a little better. He starts to give up some at-bats to kids that never get to play if they're way ahead. And I was happy to see that, but I didn't like the misbehavior. And, the coach took away his captaincy for a while because he was, fighting with his teammates, and just the immaturity and things there. And it was, so, those were struggles. And as a parent, you haven't been there, but it's hard for parents. I mean, parents it's a hard job. Sometimes some people deal better with the physicality of little kids, and that you're tired all the time, but you can control them. And then of course, when they're in high school, you can't control them and they're on their own. And that can be a mental anguish part of it. But overall, we were lucky that, things turned out pretty good for everybody.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like, everything you described right there, I feel it's just part of the experience of growing up and just, playing team sports and getting really good at it, and starting to get some real benefits from it too, in addition to what everybody gets. So as a result, I have to, deal with all those things happening at once as a parent, I'm sure is no easy feat. And for you to be able to handle it and later describe it in what seems to be very great detail and relatable, I guess, level of relatability at the same time, speaks to just how good you are at something like that and how what came of it that made it all the worthwhile too. So I guess I applaud you again for that. But
Well,
I think
thanks
now
for reading it.
well, I guess now actually I want to kind of shift gears here and talk about a little more of what you do now actually, and kind of relate to what I have you here for. But before I do that, I want to give a shout out to one of our sponsors.
Do you own a classic Mustang, Corvette, Camaro, or Chevelle from the 1960s or 70s? Does the clock in your dash keep accurate time? Do you want to get a new clock for your car, but you don't want to pay $200, $300, or even $500 for a new clock? Well, then go to ImpactAutoPartsStore.com for a brand new quartz clock that looks identical to the original and is powered by a single AA battery. All at prices less than half that of a restored clock or a reproduction. Go to the website, ImpactAutoPartsStore.com, and keep on cruising.
So now I want to start actually. Normally, I don't ask this question until much later in the interview, but because I have you here now, I guess I'll throw it out right away. And this is a very simple question, but I'm sure you'll see quickly. It's a very hard one to answer at the same time, which is when you hear the term mental health, what pops into your head and what does it mean to you?
Mental health?
Mm-hmm.
Well, my wife's a clinical psychologist, so
Okay.
that's somewhat helpful that, she's devoted her life's work to that and, sees patients and the process. And I think that I've learned a lot more about that, but man, it's such a wide open topic, just that it's super important. And it's nice that in 2021, there's just more, it's more accepted. It's less stigmatized if people are seeking help or need help. And I think that those are good things. And people, growing up when I grew up, it was a stigma and it's kind of like hidden and scorned. And I think it's nice that people today can be a little more out front with that and not be feel embarrassed about it or whatnot. So clearly very important. And during a pandemic, more so probably, and so much going on. And I feel very badly for people your age and anybody in, high school or college. It's just, you guys are getting screwed during this pandemic in a way that I don't feel that the little kids or that the, old people like me are affected the way you guys are. I think if this had happened to me when I was a senior in high school, I would have been very dark, and it would have been soul crushing for me to lose those times.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously this pandemic has only made this situation, I'm not going to say more dire, but it's made it more prevalent for absolutely certain. And it's also, it's interesting that you mentioned your wife is a clinical psychologist. Yeah, because I actually had one on my previous episode and we talked all about that kind of stuff you mentioned, which is like, the effects the pandemic is having, what, you've learned from an experience like that, and all the takeaways you've gotten from it. So as a result, I myself and a lot of other people have definitely seen this pandemic as a way of building more insight into this just in general. And I guess kind of building off of what you said and how it's becoming a lot more easier to talk about it now. One of the reasons I'm so excited to have you on here in the first place is that you've covered Boston sports teams, which first of all are among my personal favorites. But also throughout your career, you've interacted with a lot of athletes as a journalist. And I would imagine that at least some of those athletes you've confided in, they have been more open about something like this, while others maybe have avoided share anything at all. And so without revealing anything confidential, because that's not the point of this, how often do you yourself find athletes or interact with athletes who voluntarily share this stuff with you, or that they or someone close to them, might be dealing with something related to mental health or just whatever?
It's a good question. And I'm probably not the best one to answer that because I mean, I was the beat reporter for covering the Baltimore Orioles, the Boston
Mhm.
Celtics, the Boston Red Sox, about 12 years altogether, where I was every day with the one team. And again, traveling with them, buses, hotels, waiting for bags, just living with them. So in that instance, I got to know guys much better. And um, that sort of removed as I got older and became a columnist, not around the teams. They don't really know you. You're not traveling with. Um, and it's more of a hit and run, just drive by stuff. And as a columnist with opinions and being pretty critical and just what I consider to be neutral, but it's perceived as negative, um, not really trusted. So I'm not going to have guys confiding. There are people that are really good. One of the masters of that is Jackie Mcmullen, who works with Sports Illustrated, and she's about 10 years younger than me, but we worked together a long time. And I think she's just got a real good ear and sensitivity, and where athletes didn't think she was, going to betray them,
Mhm.
whatever. I didn't have much of that. Maybe early on when I was closer to the age of the athletes and I was traveling with them, there would have been more instances, you'd be drinking with guys and there'd be more confiding or late night stuff and, stuff you wouldn't use. But by and large, because of my personality and my job description and the way I go about it, and the removal of the travel with the teams, it never became an issue. I didn't have anybody really bearing their souls or telling me a lot of deep down stuff.
Yeah, no, and I can understand why that would be the case. Although I will point out something else, which is that in addition to those early years you mentioned where you were with the teams a lot, you also, like I've mentioned numerous times before now, so again, you've written books where you've gone in depth with
Yeah.
specific people, like for example, Terry Francona, in
Oh
terms of
yeah,
like,
that is
getting
the,
stuff like
the
that
Fran-
to get out of them,
yeah, the Francona thing. I mean, 8 years he was the manager, and we weren't close at all. And then he got fired, and he came around to seeing me as an ally, and we became partners.
Mhm.
And in that enterprise, he was very vested in that. So that's his book, but I was the narrator. I told the story, so we would interview, and then I would tell the story in my words,
Mhm.
a third party narrator, but it was what he wanted out there. So there was a lot of trust there, and there was a lot of soul bearing there. And but nothing got published that he didn't sign off on because it was his story. So yeah, that was an instance. But that was a business partnership, and it required that level of soul bearing and depth, and him saying how he really felt about the owners. And he was careful. He didn't want to burn any bridges. And now he's been managing in Cleveland for 8 years, and he didn't want to burn bridges with A-Rod or Jacoby Ellsbury or anybody, J.D. Drew. I mean, he was careful. But I knew how he felt about everything by the time we did that book. So that did happen. And then when I was young, I'd be out with. I spent quite a bit of time with like Larry Bird and Danny Ainge and those guys, and I really did get to know them, I feel. And I just did a book on my years covering the Larry Bird Celtics, and it's got a lot of that. It's just the access that we had, and we could tell the readers what they were like, and so that's what I've done in that book. Everybody's writing books during the pandemic, so that's my little contribution. And but it does show a level of trust and closeness that the guys covering the team today aren't going to have with Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum, or they can't get near him. And that's pre-pandemic. They still couldn't get near him. Now it's just a moat, but compared to the 70s and 80s when we were traveling and living with them, we did get near them, and we were able to tell you what they were like.
Yeah, no. And I guess actually the next question I'll ask, um, I'm gonna kind of propose a hypothetical here and ask, in those moments where guys like Francona came up to you and asked if you'd be willing to co-write this book with them, what do you believe were the factors for people like them and just any other athlete who's made something like this public? What do you think are the factors that contribute to them making something like this public, because it can't be easy, I imagine.
Well, the Francona thing, it was pretty much strictly business, and it was there were emotions at play there. He was kind of fired he averaged 95 wins. He won 2 World Series, and it wasn't really good at the end. And then they kind of did dirty on the way out the door. They revealed his Percocet abuse and his broken marriage, and that kind of got him hot at them. And he knew that they didn't like me, and I didn't like them too much. So I became. Plus, I have a very good literary agent who had done the Joe Torre book with Tom Verducci on the Yankee years. So it was kind of a parallel there. Well, he could bring me on and do for him what Verducci and my agent did for Joe Torre, just get his story out there the way he wants it, frame it from his years, the Yankee years by Torre and the Red Sox years by Francona. So I was useful to him in that sense. And he also knew that I was smart. I had a good agent. I knew baseball. I knew his dad. And, I think, and he knew the Sox would make them nervous if I worked with him. So, but it wasn't like we had this great relationship prior to the book, because he was very wary to engage until he got really mad at the Red Sox.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, it's like usually stuff like this does not come out, over the course of time naturally. It's oftentimes sparked by something specific. In this case, for Francona, was the whole ordeal that ended his tenure with the Red Sox. So I can understand why that led him to somebody like you, no less, who until then he had basically opposed for his entire tenure. So I can understand why that makes it all come together, honestly, in a very fluid and productive way. So
it worked out really well. That's a good book, and it came out good for everybody.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so I guess now I'll sort of focus a little bit more on you specifically and the way you write. And first of all, no, you're obviously known for being very pointed in your assessments of professional athletes. And I would imagine you pride yourself, in addition to being that way, as being fair. Like you said, being neutral instead of being negative, even though a lot of people perceive it to be that way. And obviously, a lot of what you write depends on the circumstances. But I would also, I guess, ask another hypothetical here and ask, if an athlete revealed to you that they struggled with something like anxiety or ADHD or depression or whatever, would that impact how you thought about them or how you even wrote about them in your column?
I think, first of all, it's almost impossible for that to happen now. But I think if it did, I think, yes, I think it would. I would probably be softer on the thing, because I mean, ultimately, it is only sports, and it's recreation, it's entertainment. It's not, it's not a political topic. It's not war. It's not religion. It's not race. It's just sports performance. And if a guy, if a guy were like quitting on his team or just, being a jackass, it probably wouldn't have any effect there. But a guy not performing well and expressing those kinds of anxieties, I'd go easier on, I think, just because there's just no need. But you can measure the effort. It's like we don't cover high schools or colleges the same way we do pros. I mean, a kid misses a free throw, lose a high school game. You don't even put his name in there. You just say somebody missed, because there's no need to embarrass anybody. And you don't boo the college quarterback. It's just like, sorry. But at the pro level, go ahead and boo away, and they're getting paid for it, and they're big boys and they can take it. So, but yeah, if there's personal anxieties or whatever, and that's been expressed in a private way, I'd maybe rather not know, but I would. I think it's only human to be a little more forgiving.
Yeah. Yeah, no. And I mean, I know you said it's a lot harder today, but there have obviously still been moments where athletes have, out of almost nowhere, revealed something deeply personal. Now, it may not be something I just described, but it still matters to how they've been performing lately. Yeah. And I think at the same time, if somebody like you were to hear that, it's important to know what the columnist or the writer is thinking in a moment like that. And I guess I would also just kind of follow up quickly on what you just answered right there and just ask, like, how exactly would you try and phrase that, put them in a different light than maybe you had in the past? Because, like, let's say, for example, this guy you had until now been criticizing like crazy for the way he's been playing it all. And now you find out this, what do you think you would have changed specifically and how you would have wrote about them?
Yeah, it's usually not criticizing the way they play as much as if they're demonstrating traits that, like they're being selfish,
Hmm.
they're not good to the fans, not good to the support staff, just jerking people around, just, being dicks or something, that I'm just not, I tend to go be harsher on those guys than somebody who's just, sometimes you feel sorry for a guy like that guy, Chris Davis with the Orioles now. He makes all that money. What's the point of just hooting on him any further? I mean, he's trying, he's making the money, and I just, I can't see getting on that. It's more when you think that they're not taking care of themselves, they're not trying, they're in denial of what's going on, or they're being jackass to their teammates. I go after that way more than just somebody, the guy goes 0 for 12 from the floor, shooting, it's like you certainly mention that, but there's no sense in hammering away. What gets to be awkward is if someone like goes into a long slump and they just keep, and it's a mental thing, or if a guy's got the yips, he's throwing the ball into the dugout and it's because he's thinking about it. That can get to be cruel. There's just no need to keep piling on about that. I mean, we know, you say what you're seeing, but and sometimes you don't want to ask a guy about it because you're just contributing to the problem. And it's obvious what it is. It's a mental thing. I don't even cover golf, but that would be an area if someone's got the yips or the putting and all that. There's been times you just more feel bad for a guy than just continue to harp on how badly he's doing. That's not necessary.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like, like you said, there's no point in getting at somebody if, he's simply just struggling with, hitting a baseball or making a shot in basketball. It's like, those things happen. It's not necessarily a knock against them as it is just bad luck in a sense. Sure. But, obviously if there are clear signs that they've been struggling forever, or something's really getting to them that's affecting them when they play, it's like, that's something worth pointing out. Now maybe I, unlike you, would have done it a little differently, but that's no criticism to you. And it's just like it's a case where it's like, we mentioned how this is such a delicate topic that is, while gotten easier, it's still tough to talk about. It's like, obviously you really, as a result, don't know what's the right way to do it each and individual time. So, and I guess I'll kind of build off of that a little bit. And first of all, note that you've been a journalist for over 40 years, and a lot has changed, including, the awareness has changed about mental health, the attitudes, the technology, and the relationship between the athletes and journalists. Obviously we talked about a lot of this beforehand anyway, but I'll just bring it up again now. And now I'll ask, in light of all those changes, and you've been probably one of the biggest noticers of it because it's affected you probably the most. I would ask now, do you believe there's a greater opportunity to further deepen the conversation about mental and emotional health in sports?
Oh, sure. I mean, we've seen through the years, again, having coaches around that are strictly around for mental health. I mean, there's guys dedicated to that. That never used to exist. Or if they did, nobody'd admit the guy was there for that. Or nobody'd admit that he goes to him and talks to him, whatever. So, yeah, I think that's sort of a, cutting edge area that has, the visualization, the focus, the things that people do in a mental way. And some of these games, I mean, baseball and golf too, in particular, it's really mental. So much of the performance to it. It's like baseball and golf are two sports where trying harder doesn't generally make you better. It usually makes you worse. Whereas in football or basketball, trying harder can have results. The physicality of it, you can get benefits to that, but almost never in baseball or golf, or probably tennis for that matter. But it's just the notion of trying harder is not going to yield results in most cases. You just got to let it come to you and slow it down, that sort of thing. So I think this has been demonstrated. And again, if you look at Major League Baseball players, those guys, the skill levels, it's not always this some giant disparity, the guys who make it and the guys who don't. It's really the guys who are able to to harness the thoughts and not get eaten up by a slump or the yips or not finding the strike zone or whatever, and just focus. And sometimes people that are not quite as deep intellectually are better at the games. And I always thought that about Manny Ramirez. I don't think Manny's a stupid guy, but I think that he just had almost no short-term memory or didn't give a shit. When he came up to the plate, it was never, oh, this guy owns me. He struck me out the last 3 times. He either couldn't remember or he just didn't care. And it was always a clean sheet of ice and a fresh, let's start over thing. See the ball, hit the ball. And there's beauty in that, because the guys who are thinking too much, it's not helpful for the most part, with very few exceptions. So yeah, it's just, my son was a good example of that. I mean, he did not have the mental makeup to advance. I think his skill set superseded the mental makeup that would have required that, and he would admit to that, because he did let the slump eat him up and think about it too much and get out of his routines and all that stuff like that. And most guys do. It's the same thing with golf. Those golfers, when you're on the putting green, it's everybody can hit the ball from here to there. It's not a strength and question. It's a question of just hitting it correctly and doing something mentally to make that happen. So that game's nutty. I just can't imagine the mind-blowing aspects of that game.
Yeah, no. Well, I mean, it's interesting actually, because right now they're having the final round of the Masters,
Right.
and as it stands, there's this guy who I've never heard of and who's representing a country that, let alone, has never had a guy ever
Right.
lead at the Masters.
Yeah, yeah, I'm with you. Everything you just said, I second that. I haven't heard of him and haven't watched, and good luck to him.
Yeah, really. But I mean, it's like right now, as far as I know, he's got a 4-stroke lead in the final round. So it's like, it speaks to the proof that, a sport like golf or a sport like baseball, in reality, anybody can do it. The question is,
Right.
how good is their mental mindset? It's like, are they
Right.
willing to not let, bad shots or,
Right.
strikeouts get to them?
Carry over.
It's
Yeah.
like, they just can't let that get under their skin and just move on to the next chance. And at the same time, just know that, this is not something that's necessarily that hard to do. The question is,
Right.
do they have it within them, to take the steps necessary to do it?
Yeah.
Because it's like you mentioned, once you get in a slump, most guys get out of routine. They start skipping steps.
Oh yeah.
If you skip those steps, it's like the whole thing doesn't work. Then it's like you're not going to get the result you want at the same time. And I guess I'll quickly follow up in a sense, follow up with a sensical question here, which is like, why do you think I got it actually. Why do you think there are certain players like Manny Ramirez, for example, but also others who were able to be so good at sports specifically like baseball, maybe Tiger Woods in golf, for example? Why do you think they were able to be so good at sports like this for so long?
Well, I mean, some of that's God-given, but taking care of yourself. I mean, not getting into bad habits with your diet or smoking or, pharmaceuticals that could, staying up too late, all the things that are bad for business. The younger athletes seem better at that than the guys when I was younger. I think careers could have lasted longer. Guys didn't take as good a care of themselves as they do now. But yeah, there's so much money in it, and it's such a gift to get to that level that guys will do a lot to keep it going and to hang on. They're smarter about it. And they have good agents, and they have people looking after them, their diets and taking care of their taxes and just all the things that they need. So I think the support is better because the money's so good and it's so critical. And just habits are better. I mean, the athletes that I see take better care of themselves than the ones that I grew up around, in terms of late hours, drinking, carousing, all that stuff. I just think maybe it's because, I don't know, they're just not as, they're more risk averse today, I would say, less reckless by and large.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, you talk about the greatest athletes ever. They were always the ones who are either the most dedicated to their craft or just were the most responsible with it at the same time. You talk about, a guy like, I'll just say LeBron James, like in basketball, he, well, obviously he's very athletic, At the same time, the fact that he's been able to take care of his
Oh,
body
yeah.
for so long is the reason he's kept being so good at it. And then,
Yeah.
you know, you talk about, you know, a guy like, gosh, I'm trying to think of a good baseball player here. Like, you
Well,
know, like,
Trout,
go ahead.
that could go. He's just doing amazing things. I just wish he'd be in a better team, but
Right.
he's put together a body of work that's pretty darn good.
Right. Yeah, no. So it's like, as a result, you know, it's like the best players usually show the common trend of just like, you know, like you said, being responsible, being dedicated, all that kind of stuff. And I guess actually I'll sort of ask an opposite question, which I ironically feel like you'll probably have a better time answering just because this is kind of what you do, which is why do you think there are so many guys who don't, you know, have this success, you know?
Well, it's just so hard to get there and to sustain it. And some guys are just so good. I think, like Trout or Bryce Harper or, you know, Soto kid with the Nationals now. You see these young players, they're so talented. But will they last? And some don't. And you go to Cooperstown, you see who lasted. Frank Thomas lasted, Cal Ripken lasted. Guys who Yastrzemski lasted, and Griffey lasted. But there were a lot of guys who were on that. Nomar didn't last. I mean, and it's injuries. With him, maybe steroids got in the way. I mean, there's certainly a possibility. There's a path there that's a little suspicious, and because he was better than Jeter, and Jeter's in the Hall of Fame, and he's not. And
Yep.
It's just so it didn't last for him. And there's guys that just have these meteoric starts and don't last. And then a game like football, it's just, the running backs, they never last. It's just the position just grinds them out and spits. By the time they're 27 or 8, they're used up.
Yep.
You just don't get guys playing into their mid 30s, carrying the ball. So it's a function of the position that they play. And now with the quarterback position, it's gone the other way where they're so protected and they're playing arena ball and no one touches them. And they take great care of themselves. And Brady's doing what he's doing, but Breeze did it. If Stafford decides to stick around, he'll break all their records. I mean, it just depends on how the motivation to keep going. And then that's curious to me what it would be when you're Tom Brady's age. I don't know what that's about. He's a freak, but why would you keep doing that?
Right.
It's just nothing else to prove. I just, to me, that's just ego. I don't understand it. There's just no need for it, but good for him.
Yeah, no, I mean, in fairness, nobody does, but at the same time, you still got to smile at the fact that he's able to do it,
Yeah.
Because at the same time, it's like, well, I don't get why he's doing it. At the same time, I could never do that.
He must just believe that. I do believe he thinks he's bulletproof and that there's no risk. But that sport would seem to have inherent risk. And given all the blessings that he has right now, I just see no need to keep doing this. But good for him. He wants to set records that'll never be broken and play till an age that no one's ever going to do again. So maybe he'll do that.
And in fairness, too, I think another thing that's kept him going for so long is actually a nod to him here is he's not afraid of failing per se. Like he's not afraid of suddenly getting knocked out. That doesn't scare him because obviously if it did scare him, he'd probably retire right now.
Yeah,
so
why wouldn't you? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like the fact of the matter is you also have to recognize that. And I guess recognize the same thing too when it comes to these baseball players like Cal Ripken who played forever, where it's a case where they, were not afraid of failing or suddenly turning around and becoming one of the biggest chokers ever,
Right. Well,
And
Pujols is a good example out there. You got him because he's on the downslide. He's not what he was, but I think he's, the money's really good and he's getting his home run total up, to the top 5 or 6, and that probably means something to him. But there's a lot of days when it's got to be a little bit embarrassing, whatever you call it, given the level that he could play at and where he is now.
yeah, no, I mean, again, this is simply just a case where it's like the interesting thing too is at both the quarterback position and just in baseball in general, it's often a case where you can actually control how long you go, because it's like, this isn't necessarily a mental or physical toll on your body. It's just a question of how best you can handle it, and that.
Uh-oh.
will determine how long you go and how baseball. It's very easy to be good at one point and then be terrible at the next point too. You just never know. Like you point out a guy like JD Martinez, for example. While he's not bad per se right now, he's not what he was. So, and at the beginning of his career, he wasn't that good either, but he turned into a great player. So I think that's just another point as to, and not actually to all these great players who were able to maintain their excellence forever. They did not let what gets to most guys get to them. So, and I guess I'll move on here and ask you this next question, which is that, and I'll first say this, which is that one of the reasons I started this podcast was because sports had a huge positive effect on me. Because for me, my deal here is that I deal with some autism issues, well, not issues, challenges. And because sports has been so effective to me, I wanted to give back by discussing these topics more openly and letting younger athletes know that might be struggling with these types of conditions. Let them know that it's okay to talk about them. Just like I think athletes like Kevin Love, Michael Phelps, Paul George are all doing. You talk about guys like them, they've been very open about what they've struggled with. For Pete's sake, Kevin Love was awarded, I think, the Arthur Ashe Award for Courage like last year for his openness on his struggles with mental health. So there's a lot to admire at in that sense. And I guess I would ask, it's the athletes obviously have one role in this for themselves, given the fact that they're the ones who talk about this stuff, because it's what they deal with or their family deals with, whatever, that affects their play on the court as a result. But I would ask you specifically as a journalist, what do you think, if there is one, what do you think the role of journalists is in a situation like this, where they should play a supporting role in these athletes in order to talk about these issues, whether it's co-writing a book or just writing about them in a more positive way?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, but I would say that I never considered it my job, my role to support any of them. We're there to cover them and to tell the readers, hopefully inform and entertain the readers. It's sports, but I think there's probably a do no harm aspect to it, but at the same time, I don't see myself in any type of supportive role for the people that I cover.
Well, I guess I would just then quickly follow up and ask, like, when you were, I'll go back to Francona, for example, what role did you feel when you were writing the book with him?
Well, again, in that case, we're business partners, and he is the controlling partner in terms of this product is going to reflect on his life, and I'm helping him tell the story of his life. So that's a partnership, and my role is determined there. But that's not my journalism hat. That's my author hat and hired gun hat, and that's what that is. And that had to be separated. If he were still managing the Red Sox, I couldn't do that. I'd have to disqualify myself from one or the other. In that instance, he was no longer a manager of any major league team. He was out of work. He was working for ESPN, so he was a journalist at that time, technically, and I was a journalist. So we were two journalists partners in this enterprise. And yeah, when you're a business partner of a guy and you're telling his story, that's easy. You're supportive, and this because it's gonna be his version of his life, and that's my role is to do that. So that is really, it's independent of. I can't think of anything analogous in my life's work to that project where I did a book with a guy and we were business partners. I don't have anything remotely close to that I can think of over the term of it.
All right, that's fine. I guess I would then quickly propose yet another hypothetical here and say if all of a sudden athletes started coming to you asking for you to help them share this part of their life where they struggle with a mental health issue or whatever, how would you respond to something like that?
Well, yeah, if one of the Celtics or Sox or somebody said, I've really got this thing, then I think, you're doing a sort of a public service. You're serving the readers and you're letting this guy tell his story, and it's probably going to be cathartic for him and helpful for him. And you're serving the population to tell them what's going on with these guys. Maybe there's a depth to him that you aren't aware of, that he's going through something you're not aware of. So you are informing your readers of his situation, and certainly would be a sympathetic angle on it. But you're not going to drive a pipe through the guy while you're supporting, him coming to you with this thing. So yeah, I think in that instance, it's like that's a good get. You've got an athlete who's willing to open up and tell his story and bare his soul, whatever, and deal with issues that are somewhat complex and not generally touched upon. So I think again in that you're the journalist. You're doing the role of a journalist to inform your readers, and you're informing them. You're taking them inside this guy's world, inside his head, and what's going on. And I guess it is supportive, but you're able to do those things simultaneously because you're doing your job, which is to inform the readers and kind of open people's minds to ways of thinking about things. And that's not advocating as much as it's just educating.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously in a situation like this, there's so many ways you can look at it, both as the athlete and as the journalist. So obviously I won't take back my opinion of you in any way because of that. So, and I totally get where you're coming from at the same time. It's like, you're right. A journalist's job is to inform the readers of what this athlete is talking about here. So it's like, it's really nothing more than that. But at the same time, if you can be helpful in this way,
sure,
and consider yourself this.
It's a win-win.
Exactly. It's a win-win. And I guess I'll kind of wrap this up here and ask you the question that I finish all my interviews with, that I feel speaks the most value to what it is we've talked about over the course of this hour, and just, what we think, the readers and viewers here today, ironically, would be best informed to know. And I'll ask the question in the context of this. You talked about how there was a stigma back then when you were growing up, and how it would be a lot harder to talk about this stuff. Obviously, while that stigma has deteriorated as more and more people have been open to talk about stuff like this, that stigma still exists. And at the same time, there are people maybe who just don't know about this stuff at the same time, just because it's so complex in and of itself. And so my question is that, in relation to all of this, basically, is that if there was anything you wanted people to know in regards to the topic of people, namely athletes or even coaches, who play or coach sports, at the highest level, who deal with mental health issues in whatever way, shape, or form, what do you think you want anybody listening or watching this today? What do you think you want them to know most about these athletes and these coaches?
Well, I think it's good if we can all remember that, they're people with the same problems that we all have, even though they're more famous, they have more money, they're probably more fit, they look better than all of us, but they still carry around, it's the old money can't buy happiness thing. They still carry around, the baggage and the things that regular folks who don't have all those accoutrements that have, and try to remind yourself of that before you start booing the guy or get on him. Again, in Boston, I really feel like our fans, they get on guys for, it's more behavioral than performance. If a guy is being selfish, not being a good teammate, not trying, lazy, flipping off the fans, whatever, but generally just a bunch of strikeouts, I'm more forgiving of that. And I think the fans by and large are too. So that's what I would remind fans to. And again, this may sound, it sound funny because a lot of people think I'm hard on the players, but I generally just go on guys' misbehavior or attitude or not owning up to their portion of the player contract, which is to, be at their 100% peak and effort.
Yeah.
But yeah, when a guy's just struggling, I find it relatively easy to go easy on that. But again, remind the readers that they're people and, needn't be scorned for not performing.
Yeah.
Every time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Again, it just speaks to the fact that, this isn't necessarily, a lot of things that happen aren't necessarily stuff that needs to be held against anybody just because it's part of the game. But, at the same time, there are certain things which you are very good at finding, ironically, that you can hold them accountable for.
Yeah.
And so obviously that's the key in a situation like this. And ironically, I think it's why you're so good at what you do. Not a lot of people can distinguish what's good to go after and what's good to let go. So I'll applaud you for that as well. And I guess I'll ask one more question here before we close and ask, is there anything you're left thinking or feeling or wondering as a result of our conversation today? And is there anything else that you feel could be addressed on this podcast or just on your column, for example, that might be helpful to these other athletes who have yet to reach the highest level, but could are looking for something useful that could maybe help them get there, or if they're destined to get there, stay there?
Well, I think that, this brings out the reporter in me when you ask that question and what's going through my mind. And, this would be me turning the tables on you and maybe you not liking it as much, but like, let me, for starters, how old are you?
I'm 17.
Okay. So in what level of education are you at? Where are you?
I'm a junior in high school.
And, what I would say is, I'm very impressed by this interview and your questions and your way of thinking, and whatever whatever issues with the spectrum or autism, they're not going to hold you back. I can see this because there's a lot of value with what you're doing, and I think it's going to play really well for you. So I'm enthused about the future for you, and I think that you're onto something here, and I wish you luck with the programming. I just think that you're really, this is good stuff, and I think there's going to be an audience for it, and I think it's great topics, and you should. I mean, I hope you stay with it because we need good young people in the field, whether it's broadcast or writing. I mean, I'd love to, like that thing when you were talking about with the golfers, and you said something like everybody can do it, like the whole golf process, like to hit the putts, whatever. And it's not, you have a way of verbalizing that I think is unique and good. And I'd like to see the writing of that. So, cause I'm all about the printed word and all that stuff, but no, I think so. This it stimulates me to thinking that there's smart young people out there that are going to carry this on with what we're trying to do, and to do it better, and to be more thoughtful, and to make things better moving forward for everybody.
Well, thank you for all of that, Dan. I honestly don't know if I consider myself that same way, but like you said, I don't necessarily have to, because if others think of me that way, it's a win-win. So
no, it's really good. And I'm not blowing smoke. It's a very stimulating conversation. I'm glad we had it. And I think you're onto something, like I said.
Yeah, no, I mean, I certainly did when I started this. So to see somebody like you agree means everything to me, and I applaud you. And I had a great time talking with you as well. And so I guess I'd like to just close and say, Dan, thank you so much for being with us today, sharing your insights, sharing your stories with our audience. I think we would love to have you come back at some point soon and tell us some more, and just give us the old good Dan Shaughnessy vibe we all love. So
well, it's been a pleasure, and I wish you luck with the program, with your career and your schooling and all that stuff.
All right. Well, thank you, Dan. I really appreciate it. And I'd also like to thank all of our subscribers and listeners for joining us today. If you'd like to see more great content, then please go to our website at www.sportsonthespectrum.net. And then for all of you, please remember the 3 rules of life, which are stay safe, have fun, get dirty. And I will see you all on the next episode of Sports on the Spectrum. So I'm Keegan Flegner now, saying so long.